And good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be on planet Earth. Welcome to Talk About Your Community. My name is Todd Nilsson with Clock Tower Advisors, and I help organizations plan for, run, and have thriving online community experiences, whether it's external for customers or prospects or stakeholders, or internal for your employee experiences. I really enjoy those conversations that help to bring people closer together, do meaningful work, and make a difference in the world. So thank you for jumping on today. This is actually unprecedented. I've had two streams this week that I've been directly involved with running. And the first one was actually yesterday with Mathis Vleming from Open Social. If you happen to miss that, you can catch it in the replay, either here on LinkedIn by going to Clock Tower Advisors or by going over to YouTube and looking at the Clock Tower Advisors channel. You can find all of our prior LinkedIn Live episodes up there for your viewing pleasure. I'm really glad that you've come back today. If you were on yesterday's, if you're new here, I'm glad to meet you, and hope that you will feel free to jump in with any kind of questions, comments during the stream. These usually run about a half an hour, maybe slightly more, but we'll see where the conversation takes us as we go here. My guest today is with a partner company of Clock Tower Advisors called CheckStep, and CheckStep provides AI-assisted moderation for online communities, a variety of kinds of online venues, and they're really an incredible company. They do a lot of great stuff, and I'm very pleased to welcome onto the stream here. I'm just going to pull her on now, Yu-Lan Scholliers, who's the head of operations at CheckStep. Welcome, Yulan. It's so nice to see you.
Hi, Todd. Good morning, or afternoon, or evening. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, and I'm excited to spend the next half hour discussing with you on trust and safety and everything that comes with it.
This is a topic that's really dear to me, because I think one of the real struggles of the community professional today is time management. And especially there's a lot of tasks that can end up being very tedious, very rote, difficult to adjudicate, and having some kind of AI-enabled assistance to determine if there are problems with content or things that need to be flagged. It's such an important piece of any kind of community experience these days. And so I was excited to be working with Guillaume and some of the others at CheckStep, and of course to be working with you as well. And so I was excited to have you on the show to really talk about this topic, which is at the forefront of enabling community professionals to do their jobs in a much better way. So I'm wondering if we might start out by you giving a little bit of your background, and I always ask people for their origin story.
Okay.
How have you gotten to CheckStep? What brought you here? What is it that interests you about the space?
Yeah, it's an interesting space. Maybe let's take a couple steps back. So I was born in Belgium, but as you might notice, my mom's Chinese, and I decided to move to London a couple of years ago, and so that's a bit my background. And then I actually studied software engineering and applied mathematics. And then after 5 years of studies, and I think this might resonate with some people, is like I literally had no clue what to do. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had good grades. I was good at math. That's why I did engineering. And I actually decided to join management consulting because I thought working for a consultancy would give me lots of exposure to how the world works. But then I realized after a year that I really missed working with data and be more data driven. And so I actually joined dunnhumby, which is a company owned by Tesco, focusing on Tesco Club Card Insights. And then after a year, I got back into an area of like, I don't know really what to do. And for me personally, I find purpose really important. I know like some people view their job as a job, but I want my job not to feel like a job. And so I started looking for jobs again, and I joined Facebook, Meta, and then Facebook, and I had very big imposter syndrome. I was contacted by a recruiter, and my first email back was like, "You want me to apply for Facebook? Are you crazy?" So I did it anyway, because someone told me that I might as well try and get some free food during my interview process. And so I did, and I initially joined advertising, and then after a year, I got back into that same feeling of like, is this really what I wanted to do? And then somehow internally, I had some discussions with some people there, and I ended up in what they call the integrity space, which is trust and safety. And that's about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's really what sparked my passion, I must say. I really found purpose and meaning starting to work in the trust and safety space. And that's really how I rolled into it. It was like I never really thought about it. I never really understood, like, I didn't even realize it existed because when I first joined, I joined a team called Counterterrorism, and I thought that sounded really cool. So I was like, let me do that. And then I just realized I had such a passion for the whole trust and safety space. And the people I worked with were also really amazing. And so from counterterrorism, I moved over to different, what we call abuse areas in suicide, self injury, adult sexual exploitation. I was exposed to lots of different cross harm abuse and issues. And so my main role there was focused on data. So I had lots of involvement on making data-driven decisions, using data to understand what we're doing, and just to give a bit of an insight, for example, in areas with counterterrorism, people say that Facebook has a lot of data, but in some areas, it's really finding the needle in the haystack. So it's really trying to use the little data that we have available to still measure that we're doing a good job. And how can you justify investing a whole team into an area where you barely have any data to measure success? Because how do you measure the success of preventing something bad from happening? And you can't A/B test that. So I did that. I was also really involved in regulation and legal, definitely in the suicide and self-injury area, and I worked a lot with policy. And then being at Facebook and in a big company, I was involved in lots of recruiting efforts. I've always been a very strong social captain, so I did a lot of social organization too. So I got a really broad exposure to the different areas of working in a bigger company. But to come back to the trust and safety, it was really where I found my passion and purpose. And the reason there is, I think for me the internet is wonderful. Like I know there's lots of, Facebook is bad, or we spend too much time on social media, but I do think in essence that it's a wonderful channel to connect people and really help if you want to, if you use it in that way. And given it's just so big, I think there's like two things that really need to happen for us to make the internet safe. Is one, we need to put systems in place for security, which is what trust and safety is aiming to do. And secondly, I believe that the mindset needs to change. It's, we use cars, and cars are powerful and dangerous also, and we learn how to wear a seatbelt. Or we learn that the world is our oyster and we travel, but we also learn that it's not great to walk around alone at night in some areas after 11 p.m. And so for me, the same goes with the internet. It's we need to learn how to make sure that we protect ourselves and don't put ourselves at risk. So that's why I care, I guess, about the space. I also just love the challenges. Like there's different challenges within the trust and safety space, and we can talk about this later. The first one is policy. Is it's you often hear that this platform should do more, but it's very nuanced. Like how can you develop guidelines that are both transparent, protect free speech, and enforce some safety? And it's such a great area because say so one example when I was working at Facebook was we have like Facebook has classifiers to detect nudity and definitely child nudity, which is awful. But then you have images such as the iconic napalm girl in Vietnam. So it's a naked girl running over a bridge after her town got attacked. And of course, the classifiers took it down, but it was the right decision because it was a naked girl. And so there's so much nuance. Also working in counterterrorism, if you post a logo of a terrorist organization but you condemn it, it's sometimes very hard for the AI to pick up that it's condemning what is happening. And so
because it hasn't necessarily understood context.
Exactly. And so there's so much nuance around how do you define this in guidelines and policies that are clear for everyone and that you can scale. And then this brings us also to regulation. Is like trust and safety space is getting more and more regulated, which I personally welcome. I think it's good to have the conversation, but then it's getting really vague because lots of the policymakers and politicians are not necessarily tech people, or they don't necessarily understand the nuance or the complexity. So there's lots of interesting challenges around there. And on the last aspect of the challenges for me is the technical side is, building AI, building fair AI, measuring that you're progressing for things that you're trying to prevent, the privacy aspect, and then also the adversarial aspect. Like lots of these harms, some harms are not really caused with the strong intent, but often there are bad actors, and every time you enforce upon these bad actors, they find a way to violate again in a different way. Exactly. So they always find a way, and so I think there's lots of technical challenges there that are super interesting.
Wow,
Yeah.
so much there. I loved hearing about your journey, and I love that you came at this world from one of working in integrity and counterterrorism, and it's brought you to these online social spaces to understand how people are using or abusing the privileges of these open platforms to have conversations. I know that too. Like the other thing that I really admired about the way that you phrased it is that there are two things that need to change. One is systems need to get better, and the other is mindsets need to change. And I felt this for a long while, especially with some of the alarming kinds of misinformation or disinformation that's been coming out, in especially some of the larger platforms that are they're the big targets. They're the ones that get the abuse. But how do we help people to train themselves to recognize those sorts of things and to use the tools a bit more responsibly, rather than, like, say, an Elon Musk who's looking to buy the platform so he can make it say whatever he wants it to say. Whatever your feelings about Musk and his innovation, that there's certainly some weirdness going on there with, like, the misunderstandings about what does free speech actually mean, and does a billionaire really need the free speech that he thinks he needs, or what. There's all kinds of stuff involved in that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I recently had a long discussion about this. I think the education part, or like learning how to use platform, is twofold. I actually believe education can play a part. I think at school you could learn that whatever you see on social media is not necessarily true. And I think you can learn that it can also be harmful to you, in the same way that I think the world is more opening up to mindfulness and meditation and just being way more self-aware. And I feel it's kind of a part of that. Definitely when I was working in suicide and self-injury, there was lots of negative body image for teenagers. And if you could learn at school that what you see in your feed is not necessarily reflective of the real world out there, and that not everyone looks perfect, or whatever society thinks is perfect, I think there's a strong education aspect. And I think parents can play a role there too, and schools, but platforms can also play a role. I think, like, I know Facebook has some tools, and other platforms, I should also really say Meta now, to like limit the time you spend online. That's one thing. I do think platforms can help educate. Other things around what you mentioned, like misinformation, like there's fact checking organizations out there that Meta, for example, integrates. And so when you're scrolling and browsing, you sometimes get the information that this piece of information might not be true. So I think there's a real opportunity there for both, like, the educational side, which happens at home and like in the usual real world context. But then I also think the platforms can help and improve our education of using social media and online platforms responsibly.
That's great. Let's turn the conversation a little bit to CheckStep. I first ran into CheckStep maybe about a year ago. I was contacted by Guillaume Bouchard, who's one of the founders, or the founder, I guess, of the organization, and they were looking for just sort of input around the platform and how it might be valuable in terms of different kinds of communities. I think I brought the perspective of, the more of the private white label communities needing these kinds of tools, especially larger communities that have a lot of moderation needs, out there that, maybe they're not at a Facebook level of scale, but they certainly need help. And a lot of those platforms have some level of moderation built in. I think that we're starting to see some AI kind of based tools in some of those platforms. I don't know how advanced they are. So I'm really interested if you maybe could give a short overview of what CheckStep does and maybe how it can help create more healthful situations within the communities they serve.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So CheckStep for people who are not familiar with it is we're a software as a service company, and our goal is to create that safe online environment for adults and minors by helping actually platforms. So we work with platforms to help them combat online harms, toxicity, and risks. And like some of these risks can be real world, like child sexual abuse of material, terrorism, but some like lots of it is often a bit more mental health related, like suicidal thoughts, misinformation, polarization. And so CheckStep builds an end-to-end solution that works like roughly in two parts. On the one hand, we have the AI powered detection, which is trying to scale what smaller companies often do very manually. It's like going to post and vetting every post that goes on their platform. And so AI can actually power that and do the scaling. But then on the other hand, you need the human moderation part. So once your AI detects content, you often still need a human layer of feedback and of checks. So usually what happens is that the AI will detect content. So it depends on what policies you have. It can be on images, text, audio, video. And then based on what the AI outputs, you can make a couple of decisions as a platform. So as a platform, you can say like, oh, the precision. So the classifier is really, really certain that this image is nudity, for example. Let's just automatically delete it. Often what happens though is that you are not always that sure, or you want to make sure that you have a human pair of eyes on it. And so you will actually send it to a group of moderators who will review the content and make a decision. And so not only does CheckStep provide the AI, but we also provide a user interface for moderators to go through to have all the information they need to make a decision on what to do with the content. And then there's lots of feedback loops that happen because the AI is only as strong as what you give it. And so we make sure that the moderators and the knowledge, like the massive knowledge that they have, can be put back into the AI. And so the user interface on top of that also helps with community moderators to help them manage their workforce, because often these moderators, it's like maybe a couple tens, 50, 100 moderators, sometimes like hundreds and thousands. And so obviously there's a strong operational aspect to that, is like, how do you manage all these people, making sure that they're working the right content, and all the technical challenge behind it. So that's a bit in a nutshell what CheckStep does. The interesting aspect is that in the market, like obviously AI detection is very nuanced, and there's lots of challenges, like you want to detect videos or images or live stream or speech, and so much more. And then at the same time, you want to maybe detect nudity or terrorism or suicidal thoughts or misinformation. So like the scope of it gets massive. And so what CheckStep actually does is that we try and provide the AI capabilities in as broad a range as possible. And this actually means for us that we don't build everything in-house. If we know that there's solutions out there that are really good, that have been proven, we will actually offer them as an AI capability throughout our platform. So we partner with different partnerships to make sure that we provide this whole broad range of capabilities. And often what can also happen is that a client can come to us and be like, oh, we actually tried out this specific API and we really liked it, and we offer it through our platform, because our goal is to be the AI marketplace and make sure that we offer the right AI capabilities, not necessarily to build them in-house. So that's a bit on the AI part. And then the other aspects that our platform helps our clients with is regulation. So, and we can talk about this later, the trust and safety space is becoming more and more regulated. And although lots of the regulations are still being developed, some regulations are very clear. So for example, in Germany, you have NetzDG, which enforces a turnaround time within 24 hours. And so CheckStep can actually help to make sure that all, say, German content that falls under this law gets reviewed first. There's also regulations required around transparency reporting, and so our tool also allows platforms to deal with these regulations without them having to understand necessarily the whole nuance of this space. And then the last aspect of our tool is governance. So data, so as I mentioned, like AI is as powerful as what you feed it. And so CheckStep kind of empowers our clients to leverage the data that their moderators output to train their own models. And so we don't own any data. We just empower our clients to use the data that we help them generate. I guess that was a very long answer.
No, it's wonderful. It's really interesting to hear about. And you know, having seen the tool in action, it is impressive to understand a little bit more about you know, just the complexities that are involved in it. I'm actually bowled over at the thought of having to work your way through all of the different regulatory requirements with every nation that where you might want to operate or do some business. Because I think you know, there's even some upcoming regulations around the online safety bill in the UK or the Digital Services Act in Europe. How are those impacting what CheckStep is doing going forward?
Yes. So that's a very interesting point, because the regulations, both the Online Safety Bill in the UK as the Digital Services Act in Europe, are still quite in early stages. So the way CheckStep goes about is that we partner with a consultancy, and we make sure that we are informed, and we make sure that we start building in the aspects and the features that we know will be coming, while being aware of what might be coming. Just to give you some context, the online safety bill in the UK, for example, got published only a couple of weeks ago, but it still has to go through parliamentary hearings. I think I got that right. I know that there's different layers of discussions that need to happen. I don't know whether that's necessarily Parliament, but the whole process might still take 2 years. And so obviously there's a lot of uncertainties about it, but we make sure that we communicate with the consultancy, that we understand what is happening in Parliament, what the modifications are, and then we also talk with our clients and hear their concerns. And then we make sure that we build in these features. But it's just very complicated. I mean, it's a very challenging problem. I'm happy that the conversation is happening, but it is very complex, because it's a bit of a trade-off between privacy and security, between safety and free speech. And there's lots of good intent in there, but it always has a flip side, and that's why it's probably still going to take a lot of time. One example of this flip side is that the online safety bill is talking about identity verification, age verification, so that you as a user, when you go on a platform, you actually see who has, for example, not been verified. So for example, a user who's anonymous, and you can then, for example, hide these users. And I think obviously that's a good thing, because lots of bad actors hide behind anonymity. However, lots of users also need that anonymity. Like if you're a victim of harassment, or you want to be protected in some way, this anonymity is really important. So there's challenges around, you know, the policy side, how you define these rules. There's also obviously technical challenges, because who's going to provide this identity verification? Like CheckStep is partnering with partners that can help with the verification, but overall, if this happens at a UK level, like who will hold the data of your identity, and how will you be able to be sure that your data and your identity, that data is stored safely? So yeah, there's lots of challenges. We're just trying to stay on top and make sure that we are ahead of whatever will be published. But it's still a long process. Like lots of the definitions that the online safety bill are having, like they make a good distinction between illegal content, which is relatively clear, like terrorism and child sexual abusive material. That's relatively clear. However, they've added a legal but harmful section, and the definitions are not there yet. And in a way, it's good that they're discussing about this, because it gives some clarity on platforms on what they should go after, what they don't have to go after. But it's still like it's going to take a long time. And then the other thing is that the impact of these regulations at the moment, the way these regulations are framed, it seems that the impact will be mainly limited to large platforms. And the thing is that these large platforms already have a lot of trust and safety in place. So I think in an immediate step, like the impact won't be that large, because these large platforms already have things in place. It's just going to clarify what they should definitely focus on, and what is maybe less important. So for smaller and medium-sized businesses, it's even vaguer because they don't know whether they fall under the rule or not. And they should definitely, I mean, as a platform, I would definitely encourage every platform to have safety features in place. But because these regulations actually, as opposed to Section 230 in the US, which protects free speech, these regulations also threaten with sanctions. I think there's even like jail sentences that can happen.
Wow.
It's a bit scary, and so it's very unclear how this will impact, I would say, the large volume of smaller businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely is. My question to you is: Are you responsible for initiating and having those conversations with all of the different governing bodies, or is that something that Guillaume has to do?
We generally don't have to. Like
Okay.
as a provider, we are informed and we're in the loop. We're not
Okay.
necessarily having these conversations. Yeah, I think that would be a whole other company in itself.
Yeah, yeah. I would be thinking though that those governing bodies should be having conversations with you as vendors to be better informed about what's there and what's available.
Yes, I agree. I agree. But at the same time, I do think lots of these discussions are happening because of what's happening on social media, like on
Mhm.
the big platforms like Meta, and Twitter and YouTube. And so these discussions are happening, but at another level.
Sure, sure. A couple of other quick questions. I know we're getting a little bit low on time here, but as far as moderation goes, I think most people are understanding, the keywords or things that might get flagged in
Mhm.
text. But how do you do it with visuals, with images, with video? I think you even mentioned with live streams,
Mhm.
uh, or even just audio. Um, are there technologies in place to handle that? Are there things that CheckStep is doing to get its arms around that kind of content?
Yes, yes. So yeah, I think text for most people, like keywords is like the first step. There's videos, and often like the technology with videos, like what you could imagine is that like a video is actually a series of images, and so you want to scan all the images in the video. Like that's in theory. In practice, like that takes a lot of computational power, so it needs a bit of a smarter approach around this. And the same thing with audio. There's different ways of doing it. But then, like, for example, the first basic step would be transcribe audio to text and then use the text classifier. For example, these are different solutions. The challenge also with all of this is um, like obviously you have the different formats, but then you have different languages. So that
Right.
also gets challenging. And then obviously US and English is the most prevalent language, and often the classifiers are very well trained. So it's very important to ensure coverage in language. But then the other thing is also culture, because an image might be very offensive in one culture, but not in another. So for example, if you're more in a Middle Eastern country, a woman wearing just a top might be offensive. Well, obviously in Western Europe and the US, that would not be offensive at all. So again, like there's the technology, but the technology is more like the means. They're the building blocks, but then it's the data that you feed to the technology and the input that you get from the community moderators, from the policy experts that actually help shape all this complexity.
So thinking about some of the methods for sampling images or audio in a conversation, that makes me think a little bit about the metaverse and how
Mhm.
if we start moving into virtualized environments, that well, I could certainly track audio and see what's happening there, but I would think there would maybe even be some new rules in a metaverse kind of situation having to do with virtual proximity, to somebody else's
Mhm.
avatar and what could be interpreted as threatening behavior, and flagging that, for moderation purposes. I mean, wow, the complexities of that are mind blowing.
Yes, yes, I agree, and I think like a couple things, like we will see. I mean, we are seeing the same type of harms for sure already in the metaverse, and they just manifest either a bit similar, like with speech, but also in new ways, as you mentioned, like people just get really close to you in a virtual world. Like, is that offensive, because in a way it's not happening in real, right? So where is
Yeah.
the boundary?
But it's culturally relevant, like you were saying too. Like, different cultures have different acceptable
Yes,
distances.
yes, yes,
So
and
fascinating.
I think like it's definitely only the beginning. I think the metaverse is definitely still very early stages. My main concern is actually computational power, as you mentioned. Like if someone walks up to you in the virtual world, you can measure that, but it takes a different type of computational power to actually track all of this. And I think some of the solutions that were mentioned is like by recording, or like by literally storing the last 15 minutes and then reporting it. But then I was reading this article about these sensory suits that they're developing. And
Yeah.
so what if you're wearing a sensory suit and someone gropes you? Like what? How do you track that? It's just like, yeah, the same harms will happen, but they will manifest in different ways, and it's a bit scary. But at the same time, I
It's
I,
amazing.
I think I do hope we still have some time to figure all of this out.
We're going to have to. I mean, it's there are new vistas of experience opening up.
Yes,
And there's always the good and the bad with it. When it's as soon as there's something new, like the promise of a metaverse and immersive experiences and the ability to connect in different new ways and reduce those social barriers that have been in place in the online world for so long. The more barriers we take down, the more opportunities for abuse it seems like there
yes,
are.
yes,
And we just need to enter into it with open eyes and be thinking about how that works. And so I'm glad we have guardians like you guys trying to help us understand, what the risks are and be able to address them. Um,
mm,
I, I think we've covered the question we said we were going to cover. There was one that I'm interested in that it occurred to me as we were talking here today, which is, all of us have been experiencing, the news and the horrific stories about what's been coming out of Ukraine
mm.
and Russia's unprovoked attacks on that country. Um, what new learnings have maybe come out of that experience of seeing how misinformation or disinformation is being employed in a warfare kind of situation? I don't no worries if it's all to be determined, but I was just kind of curious as we were talking about this today.
Yes. Yeah, I think definitely with this media coverage, first of all, like it saddens me deeply that this is happening. And what I've seen is the power of governments and the there was the tension between Facebook and Russia about trying to mute the social media platform in certain countries, and it just shows how important it is to have these channels of communication. Like obviously there is the misinformation, but I do want to call out this is trust and safety. It's because a lower percentage of the population is doing these harmful things. I think like we cannot forget that. I would say I don't know if this number is correct, but like say 90% of social media is there to do good and to connect people. And just the issues around trying to mute these social media platforms shows how important it is to protect free speech and to protect communication. And I think that that's really important. And at the same time, I've seen so many initiatives on Facebook and on LinkedIn to help people, and I think it's just really important to call this out, and that it's important to protect these platforms and make sure that politicians don't necessarily can influence that power and be like, oh, we want to close this platform down because it's spreading misinformation, while it's then also stopping the possibility of people helping each other.
Mhm. I wonder if there are some solutions. Like education is certainly one of the things we talked about, and mindset. And I'm casting my mind back very far to my journalism and mass media courses I was taking. I can't remember if it was like Neil Postman or Marshall McLuhan, sort of talking about. It might have been Postman, talking about sort of the function that soap operas served in the early 20th century,
Mhm.
to really kind of raise levels of literacy and understanding of social dynamics and things that are happening. I wonder if we need sort of the same sort of storytelling in how to live and use these tools responsibly. Like put it into a fictional context, but how these things are being turned in ways by that 10%, not the 90%.
Yeah.
In ways that are damaging and hurtful to us, and recognizing what those are, maybe in a story context, might be a way for us to move forward. I'm always thinking in terms of the storytelling, but
Yes.
I'm fascinated by this problem that's facing us today.
Yes. Yeah, I think storytelling for me, and a powerful one, is analogy, because in our in-person world we have a juridic system, we have laws, enforcement. Obviously, these are also not black and white. You can be opposed to some countries and their regulations, but I think people need to realize the analogy with the real world is that there's also bad actors out there in the real world, and we have systems in place to try and find them and to um, handle with them. And I think people need to realize that social media is not necessarily very different, and that there's also bad actors out there, and that we need to be mindful. So for me, it's storytelling and just drawing analogies with concepts that people are aware of, and that they do know, and that they are familiar with.
I love that. I love that. And so, well, Yulan, if someone's interested in learning a little bit more about CheckStep, if they're wondering if it's the right kind of platform solution, for them, for their community that they're trying to run, what's the best next steps to take for them?
Yeah, feel free. Like, if anyone's interested, we have a LinkedIn page. We're very active there and very responsive. So that's probably the easiest way to get in touch with us is follow us or message us, and we will get back as soon as possible.
Wonderful, wonderful, Yulan. Thank you so much for joining me today on this. I hope you come back again, or maybe we can do a little deeper dive and actually do a screen demo of
Oh yeah, yes,
how
that'd
some
be
of these
wonderful.
platform tools work. That would be really fun to do. I might not do it as part of the live stream. I might do it as just a recorded YouTube and put
Yeah,
it up as well, so we can
yes,
maybe dive in a little deeper and talk about some of these things. But so wonderful learning about these issues. I realize we just kind of skimmed the surface of a lot of these topics today, but hopefully those of you who are watching, or if you're watching on replay, please drop in comments. Tell us what's on your mind, what kinds of questions or ideas you have. I watch all the comments. I respond to everybody possible. And if there's something there, specifically for Yulan, maybe you'll be able to jump in too and
yes,
reply
for
as
sure.
well. In the meantime, we're coming into the weekend. I hope that you are taking good time for yourself. You relax, you unplug maybe for a few minutes, and spend time with family, friends, enjoy some of the outdoors. And I will be back, not next week. I don't have a scheduled live stream next week, but the week after, I should be back and online with my friend Darren Guff from Island 23, who is also part of the safety tech movement. And we'll be chatting a little bit about community management going forward. Just a quick shout out to my friend Amadou, who showed up on the chat here. Always a wonderful colleague as well. So in the meantime, have a great weekend. I will see you soon. Thank you for tuning in. And Yulan, we'll see you again soon for another session.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.